welcome everybody to the third webinar in our series, which is highlighting the key learning from our book, Developments in Virtual Learning Environments and the Global Workplace. So the topic for today's webinar is, how does virtual experiential learning develop students' employability in the global workforce? So our chapter experts, who will introduce themselves in just a minute, will discuss their thoughts around this topic, including the prospect of future challenges that students might face. So in this section of our book, we have 6 chapters. 4 of them are represented today, including my own one, which is Employer Perspectives on Virtual International Working, Essential Skills for the Globalized Digital Workplace. We also have Deborah Burleson from Baylor University in the USA, whose chapter is Short-Term International Virtual Teams, Preparing Students and Employees for a Digitized Global Workplace. We have Marcio Coelho from the Providence University College in Canada. Apologies, Marcio, if I've mispronounced your name there. The title of his chapter is Bringing Excitement to Learners Working with Real-Life Clients, Students Developing a Marketing Plan for Companies. And then the final chapter that we're going to hear about today is from Kimberly Josephson from Lebanon Valley College in the USA. And Kimberly's chapter is called Minding the Competency Gap from College to Career, the Value of Virtual Teaming and VLEs for Skills Development. So lots to look forward to. So I'm going to very quickly introduce myself and the co-editors that are here today, and then I'm going to ask each of our chapter authors to say a little bit about who they are and their experience in the world of collaborative online virtual learning. So my name is Izzy Crawford. I'm a senior lecturer at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, Scotland. And my experience is mostly collaborative with the co-editors of this book. In fact, Stephanie and Susan, who I'm delighted are here with us today. Bellum, the other co-editor, unfortunately can't join us, but says hello. And my COIL project has been spanning those 4 countries, Portugal, USA, Germany, and Scotland. But more recently, I've been doing my own PhD research, which I'm going to tell you about a bit later on. So I'm going to pass the buck over now to Deborah. First of all, do you want to say who you are?
Yes. Well, I'm Deborah Burleson, and I teach in the business school at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. A lot of people know Waco through Fixer Upper and Chip and Joanne. If not, that's been the most positive thing coming out of Waco lately with Baylor. My dissertation research and a lot of where I've spent my research space is in healthcare communication. And in the last 7 years, I've gotten more into virtual teams through teaching in Europe at one university. And they needed a project to look at team collaboration. And so this just naturally flowed into a virtual team project with my students at Baylor and those students. And I just thank you for being here today.
Thank you for joining us, Deborah. Marcio.
Okay, thank you. I'm Marcio Coelho. I'm an associate professor at Providence University and Theological Seminary in Otterburn, Manitoba, Canada. So yeah, I have been teaching here for 6 years now. This is my 7th year, and I have developed this project with marketing students to help them develop a business plan, a marketing plan, a real marketing plan for companies. And it's a kind of practical experience associated with the theoretical concept that we have been discussing in class. And so far, it has been a great experience for them. And I'm still doing my research and collecting data on that.
Thank you, Marcio. And Kimberly.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kimberly Josephson. So I'm an associate professor of business at Lebanon Valley College, which is in Annville, Pennsylvania. So very close to Hershey, if you've ever heard of Hershey chocolate, the sweetest place on earth. But I also am an associate dean for the Breen Center for Graduate Success, which really focuses on career readiness. So I really loved getting connected with you all on this project because I teach courses on strategy, international business, principles of management, all those types of things where, you know, we focus on managing teams, organizations, different structures, different systems. But also I heavily focus on what are the skill sets that organizations are looking for, and how do we embed that in the curriculum, and how do we do that at our institution. So, you know, I have this chapter in the text has a special place in my heart, and I'm just so thrilled to be part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. That's so interesting to hear, and welcome to everybody else who's joined us from around the world for our truly international webinar, which is always a really nice thing to be part of. So I think that leads us on nicely into our discussion about the chapters. Now, as my chapter is the first one in this section of the book, I'll go first and tell you a bit about my experience and then open it up for questions. So, following on from my COIL project with Stephanie and Bella and Susan, I felt that it would be really interesting to explore in a bit more detail employer perceptions of this kind of teaching and learning, collaborative online international learning. And so, as part of my PhD project, I interviewed 12 employers in different types of setting, different countries around the world, in depth, find out what they think about it. What does it hold any value? Do they think universities should be doing this on a bigger scale? But particularly, what kind of benefits are there in terms of graduate preparedness for the workplace? What kind of skills is it giving graduates of the future? Is it helping employers to get the people that they need to deliver what they need in the future? So, as a result of this research, I was able to identify 8 significant themes from it, which included technological challenges and opportunities, perhaps no surprise there, given we're talking about virtual learning, virtual teamwork challenges, but also some solutions that were suggested by employers, transversal skills and future employability. Now, with all of these things, what was so interesting is that, of course, in the workplace, they were experiencing exactly what we were experiencing in higher education as a result of the pandemic. In essence, a digital revolution where everybody had to learn how to do things remotely. So many of the COIL challenges that students had identified previously, employers were also identifying as part of their day-to-day working lives. So there's quite a mirroring effect going on there. Transversal skills were picked up on as being even more important post-pandemic than they were before, and also just to have the kind of ability to adapt and be resilient in the future as well. Intercultural skills, the globalized workplace, again, very important, increasingly so in the future. There was a lot of talk about the effect of pandemic because the interviews I carried out were just before lockdown in the UK, during lockdown in most parts of the world, and it was very clear the difference, a quite dramatic difference between the people I interviewed before lockdown and the people that I interviewed after lockdown. Virtual learning environments went from being something that's nice to have and probably quite important to this is absolutely essential. Every university needs to be teaching this, no matter what the discipline. So the sense of urgency was suddenly dramatically ramped up there. Other themes that were really interesting, though, that came out were the importance of digital literacy in students, it's too easy to make assumptions about how digitally literate our graduates are, and employers often say that they're not quite as digitally literate as they may think they are or we think they are. Pedagogical balance between theory and practice. So the need for more experiential learning was identified. You need to learn by doing much more. Business ethics, social responsibility, sustainability, all very key hot topics just now came through in the themes. And then the last one, interestingly, was about generational and industry sector differences, and the ability of people of different ages and different sectors of industry, how well they adapted to this digital revolution. And what was interesting for me in my interviews is that the older people felt the younger people were less well equipped, and younger people thought the older people were less well equipped. So maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle, who knows? And so that's really the main findings for me. Stephanie, did you have a question?
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. What would you say was the most important theme of the themes that you've mentioned? And what does it tell us about how COIL projects should proceed in the future?
Sure. I mean, well, this is a really good question, because how I felt at the end of it was that there were a couple of more dominant themes, particularly around digital literacy and transversal skills, but actually the way that the employers expressed their strength of feeling, all of the themes were very important. And so I felt it was necessary to try and reflect that in my conclusions. And so to try and help higher education and potentially workplaces to move forward, I thought it might be useful to develop a new conceptual model which describes the kind of traits that graduates need to have in the future workplace, now and in the future, post-pandemic, based on what my employers had told me. And it has a nice acronym, which is DYNAMITE. So the D stands for digital. So the graduates need to possess strong, versatile, upgradable digital skills. The I stands for innovator. So they need to be creative problem solvers, confident out of their comfort zone. The N is for negotiator. They need to be excellent communicators and achieve effective compromise. The A is for aware. So they need to be self-reflective, empathetic and understanding. The M is for motivated. They need to be conscientious, driven, and require minimal supervision. The I is for intercultural. So they should have global understanding, be culturally aware, sensitive and competent. The T is for team player. So showing leadership ability, being adaptable, but also being supportive. And then finally, E for ethical, where the graduate should be socially, environmentally, and morally aware, avoiding causing harm to anyone or anything. And so these are the kind of traits going forward that employers were telling me that they're looking for. And in conclusion, based on what they said, it would seem that this type of experiential learning virtually can help to facilitate those kind of competencies and those kind of traits if it's been well designed. So hopefully that answers your question, Stephanie. Thank you very much. I'm just conscious of the time and the need to move on. So Deborah, can you please tell us about your chapter? What's it about?
All right. Well, my chapter came over a series of years, and I share with that in the opening of a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of working through why didn't this work and how could I make it work better. So the chapter is a culmination, I wouldn't say complete success, but really, we finally got there. I felt like I was with the team all along. And what I wanted to focus on is it's more of a detailed account of how to do all this, what needs to happen as I approach us as being team managers, and project managers, really, where you have teams that are doing their activities. But what needs to happen before, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus on today. What happens as you go through the cycle, kind of some timing suggestions on the preparation has to happen a lot longer before you would think it would happen, before the teams begin. And some of you you prepare well in advance. You're at something an hour before it starts. Some of us aren't quite like that. And I wouldn't say procrastinators, but I'm there, 10 minutes early. Well, a virtual team, planning it out takes a lot of planning, but you'll definitely reap the rewards. And then I talk about technology, and then reflecting and assessing. So wanted to go today into a little deeper dive into the preparation before the launch, and then in assessing and reflecting. Because those are things that I didn't do quite as much at the beginning, and I saw the benefit later. So on looking at communicating and team building activities, I was much like Izzy in that this past last spring, I was in Europe and navigating all of that it was like spring 20 when the lockdown occurred. And so it was very interesting to see everything going on. And it was also an added insight about what students in the US were experiencing and the students in Europe and how they could share. But we do some activities, and some of them are so simple. And I don't want you to think once the students do them, they begin to see. And I think this could definitely go into the employment arena, where we separate in teams of 2. We had breakout sessions for us, and you have someone draw. Someone describes an image that is not like at face value an image, and I have some pictures in the chapter, and then someone else draws that based on their verbal explanation, and you begin to see some things that miscommunications in communication. And when you're in a virtual space, it's really important how you explain things. And it just highlights, oh, I thought I was saying this, I thought you would understand. And then you also can talk about, well, you described it differently, and that made me understand it better. I would never have thought to have described it that way. So some of the team building activities are very helpful. With that also comes, I would say, what I would bold is not to make any assumptions about what the members of your team know. That was something I learned through my first years, is that assumptions about technology. Sometimes we talked earlier when we were just talking before this began, we have assumptions of what we think sometimes older people know or younger people know, and those assumptions are not correct many times. And so we all know the spaces in technology that we work with, but do we know other spaces? And how does that work when we learn other spaces? And just practicing that in advance. One example is I wanted the students to communicate using several different mediums, and I wanted them, the US students, to use WhatsApp, because the rest of the world uses WhatsApp, but our US students do not. And so we had a little learning curve where I wanted them to download, and they saw some benefit in that. I wanted them to download. I wanted them to practice using it before they met with their virtual teams. And you could see the people who decided they didn't need that. And then all of a sudden they were quite lost the first week. But technology, looking at, have they worked in a team, and what are their thoughts about teamwork? And you need to kind of work through healthy teams, unhealthy teams. What does that look like? And then international awareness, and even time zones can be a real challenge. And I have a picture in the chapter where, because I have it on my phone, and I used a world clock, and I made sure that I had my time zone where my home is, but the time zone where I was, and other time zones. My daughter's in the UK right now, then you have people in Europe. There's all different time zones and how that impacts a team. And I remember one of the first, we'll get to reflections, but in the reflections, I began to see that even more. So any activities that help kind of pilot what's going to happen before it happens, so they see and they have that moment where they're not having that moment of, oh, I didn't realize that the first week of the team. And then looking at reflections. So what I had the students do is after every communication, I had a form and they filled it out and they reflected with some jumpstart questions that I asked them about the experience with the team. And it involved, the focus was communication, of course. And that gave me great feedback. And I made sure that I tried to read almost every student's initial post of their reflective notes as we began, because I could respond to them and I could assure them or kind of guide them on what was going on before they got deeper into the project. And then the feedback. So one of the first feedbacks was the student in the US said, well, I was not aware it was dark in Europe when I was talking with them. Well, even though they knew there was a 7-hour difference, they hadn't really thought about if it's 3 p.m, it's 10 at night. And then also military time versus the time that we traditionally use. So there's a lot of, I think the feedback's important. And I think also in a corporate setting, sometimes you feel you don't have time for feedback, but it benefits you with the next team project. And it can be very painless, even though it seems painful at the time. So I'm going to stop with that and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Deborah. That's so interesting. And I think I definitely need an international time clock on my office wall that it's just there to remind me where everybody's at. But that's just so interesting. And I think, Susan, you've got a question for Deborah. Is that right?
I do. And Deborah, you talked about you doing all of the pre-work before you actually launch the project. And that pre-work takes a lot of time, as you've noticed. And it takes a lot of time to plan the activities, to do the pre-work, and to also look at the feedback. You mentioned just a minute ago that often corporations and business don't look at the feedback, but they should. I teach a business agility class where I insist they do not only the pre-mortem, but the post-mortem, because I said it's an investment. You're going to really do a better job next time. But finding that time is challenging, not only for you, but for the students. Do you have suggestions about ways to demonstrate the value of investing that time to both other faculty and students?
Right. I think one of the ways is sometimes if you can get them to do that first activity, students, it's sometimes a little easier, sometimes not, but you can also share stories. For example, I had a great example. Izzy may find this humorous, but on drawing the activity, one of my students said, well, okay, next you need to draw a shape. It's like a kilt, draw a kilt. And so the US student was a kilt, it was like Googling what is a kilt, trying to figure it out. And so you saw a cultural awareness, as they had talked about that, and that stayed with them, the whole team. It really bonded them from the start. But you do see sometimes, and it's like saying, you're a flexible person, you like to learn new things, let's try this one activity. And that's where they begin to see the value, or you share about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions for Deborah?
I have another one, if I can ask it, Izzy.
Sure.
These are, because of the nature of what we have to do within a semester of a course thing, they're short-term projects and they're virtual team projects. Would you suggest that you do the same pre-activities and feedback for long-term? If you're in the corporate workplace and you're going to be spending 6 to 8 months working on this particular team, do you suggest doing so? And again, how do you sell the value of that to the organization?
Right. I think with long-term teams, and I've visited with a lot of advisors in corporate, sometimes it's on an airplane. I met a wonderful woman who I shared a quote with her because she deals with teams all the time and was so excited about this research. I'm so glad you all are doing this. And but sometimes what happens with a team is you have a team intact, but you have a new member come in, or depending on the expertise, and as that project evolves over the long term. And so you want to make sure as you bring this new team member in that they understand kind of what's going on, that you have a little bit of time. That's different from a short-term team. And I did select a short-term just due to the semester. And also, as I began reading, there are a lot of applications of short-term teams in the corporate arena. But looking at new team members, I think you do still need to start afresh. There's nothing like being reminded of something that you had forgotten. Or also, if you could ask those team members, do you think your previous team operated at 100%, on board? They probably each would have a story. Why don't we step back a minute? Why don't we do a few of these things? And I think also as project manager, you would be able to know. You wouldn't necessarily have them do everything I said, but you would know the gaps that are there and where the team has struggled through that reflection. And I wrote down your word because I love that word investment, because that definitely, that ROI translates to the business world because time is so critical.
That's so insightful, Deborah. And I'm thinking about return on investment and other phrases, which if you link it into what we're doing could have more resonance in the workplace as well. So thank you so much for those reflections.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Kimberly next to tell us about her chapter. What's it all about?
Sure. Yeah. So actually, just a little bit more background is I started teaching full-time in 2008, and as a business professor we really leverage group work in the classroom, and we talk about, well, you're going to have to do this in the workplace and things like that, and so even throughout my teaching profession I've wanted to figure out the best way to ensure that you didn't have any free riders and that you had students who were invested in the team and who found value in it and understood that process. And so early on, I was really fascinated with the conceptual framework developed by Bruce Tuckman, which I bring up in my chapter. And it's comprised of stages that sound rather basic, but they're really important not to overlook. And so each of the stages, it's forming, storming, norming, performing, and then later it was amended to add adjourning. So kind of like that, as you were just saying about investment, right? So even though the group might have disbanded, what are maybe some takeaways from this? What is some information that should be saved? In terms of team performance and individual performance, how can we leverage what we've learned and apply that to when a new team has to come together on a certain project? So I really have always kind of thought in terms of the practice of, okay, let's make it a substantial effort to focus on the team itself before we get into being task oriented. So being people oriented and then task oriented, because communication, trust, all of that is so important for information sharing and for collaboration and creativity. And you can't do that if team members don't feel vested in the project, let alone connected to their partners. So those are the things that I kind of flesh out in the chapters, what those stages mean. And obviously in the 1960s, we weren't talking about virtual teaming. So I kind of, updated it to today, to present tense, to, okay, how does this apply? And what are some concerns even with being in the virtual realm? Obviously, there are many benefits in terms of flexibility, connecting like we are right now. However, in regards to building rapport and trust and even just speaking candidly and openly and feeling that kind of social connection, it lacks. It's lacking when you are dealing with communicating over a screen rather than over a cup of coffee, which a lot of great brainstorming is done through just hanging out. That's why some organizations have pool tables and tennis ping pong tables and things like that, and communal areas, because then that allows for really free talk and free thinking and just even building camaraderie amongst organizational members. And so you don't get that same dynamic when you are working remotely. So that's kind of where I kind of got started thinking about, okay, how am I going to focus on this chapter? Also, I have a concern in that a lot of our incoming students, well, let me backtrack a little bit. Higher education is an important tool for organizations that are in recruiting cycles. They see college really as kind of that intermediary. So if you think in regards to industry, you know, how you take those raw materials and you fine tune them and you add value, and then you serve as that intermediary, you know, selling to the end user. It's kind of the same thing where we're taking these young adults and we're engaging in skill development, they're acquiring knowledge, they're gaining exposure and experience. And then at the end of their, you know, campus experience, when they leave college, not only do they have a degree, but they've got those networks, those experiences. And that's actually what most employers are really interested in. It's not necessarily the major that they choose, it's the things that they partake in. And that's actually why residential college, residential campuses where students live and even work on campus are highly valued by employers. Even though a lot of organizations are welcoming of virtual, you know, the virtual realm and online learning and things like that within their organizations, studies have shown that they still prefer for students to acquire in-person instruction when they're when they're pursuing higher education. And that's because it is that process of socialization. And, you know, those are really formative years too. So it's something that I even touch upon in my chapter is how being present on campus and in classrooms, it gives the opportunity for dialogue and conflict. And conflict is actually a really good tool for students to kind of learn how to deal with hostile situations and disagreements, and you know, using a level of discernment of when they should share their opinion or not. So the being in college is really important for that social element. And so then I got a little concerned when we had the shutdown where everybody went remote and college campuses all went online. And, you know, we did our best. And I think, you know, students were doing their best too, but now we're missing that kind of key socialization process. And what's even a little bit more disheartening is within the United States, students are going to college with less work experience than they used to. Most students had, you know, summer jobs or part-time jobs or things like that when they were in high school, whereas now we have so many extracurricular activities. Everything is kind of structured. They have their assigned, you know, tasks that they do and groups that they're part of and things connected to the school, that they don't really have that opportunity for external learning within a business environment and within an organization. So that's why I have my chapter titled, it's a bit cheeky, but saying, you know, minding the competency gap, and that, hey, we have this kind of gap that, you know, only time will tell how that might impact office interaction, especially if it continues to be virtual. So then I looked into, okay, what are best practices for virtual teaming? Because if we are going to stay working in this remote realm, or if it does just become the preferred choice, you know, it is a concern that if students don't have those communication skills, critical thinking skills, the soft skills, right? So human competency skills have to be developed over time, and they're best developed through interpersonal relationships. So it's kind of like, okay, well, what can we do? What are things that we know? And so I looked to Deloitte and their principles for virtual teaming and leadership. And they have 8 principles of just, these are good strategies when you have a virtual team. And so I'd encourage those who have an interest to definitely check out my chapter. I won't read them all off to you. But once again, they're basic, but really important. Just, you know, an example would be having consistent and constant communication. They actually say, you know, over communication is really not possible when you're dealing with a remote team, because you need to find engagement. Another kind of interesting principle is creating new traditions, right? And that kind of sounds silly, but you need to create some sort of way to cement people to the team so they feel that collaboration and that connection. And so really my chapter looks to kind of connect those principles with Tuckman's stages. And it really drives the message home. Once again, you have to focus on the formation of the team and the people of the team before you really expect performance and become task oriented. So yeah, so maybe I'll leave it there because I could go on forever because it's just, there's so many interesting things to talk about. But
there really are, Kimberly, and it feels like the team building, socialization, transversal skills is really coming out as a strong theme already in this webinar. And it's interesting to see that you took inspiration from Deloitte, from an employer, around how to develop those skills in teams. So there's definitely a lot we can learn from industry, and industry can learn from us as well. So I'm just going to open up to questions now. I know that Susan, you have one to maybe start us off with.
I do. And, I think it's great that you mentioned Deloitte. And of course, Deloitte's a huge international corporation. And I'm thinking about in my classrooms, for instance, I've got 18 people working in 3 different group projects at the moment. So you've got big to small. How does the size and the purpose of the organization impact those teaming efforts?
yeah, so I mean, it really is important to kind of understand how to balance the team dynamic. So oftentimes, 6 to 9 people is good and things like that. If the organization is very big and you are working in this virtual format, it is very helpful to break it up, essentially, have these teams, because it's very unlikely that the organizational members can feel connected to the whole institution when they're just really siloed on their own. So it's important to have teams, but also maybe even offer opportunities for cross-functional teaming. So if you have a larger organization, to almost have this role rotation, so employees can get connected with different departments within the organization. So then they realize, okay, it's not just my department, it's, I'm part of something greater. That allows for some flexibility. That role rotation and the kind of idea of cross-functional teaming is pretty commonplace just naturally within small firms, because you wear many hats because you are small. And when you have a smaller firm, you are a team in and of itself. So it's unlikely that you have to do a lot of that kind of project-based approach. Whereas in a large organization, the team might be prioritized more for organizational culture and reasons related to kind of that employee buy-in, versus a smaller organization. The team is probably more in terms of, okay, we have to get this done. It's a certain task and things like that. And then in regards to the purpose, so the purpose of the organization, the purpose of the project, if it's something that has a quick turnaround, you might know specifically, which team members are going to be able to kind of jump at that task and work on it, versus if the project is, once again, maybe focused on the organizational culture. I want to allow those team members to really go through the process of those stages that Tuckman talks about, forming and storming, where they really have to connect, they really have to collaborate. I'm not going to rush them, because it really is more about getting that engagement and buy-in in the team effort. So thinking about the team process as a form of skill development. So I'm not just looking to have them complete the task, I'm actually looking to invest in that human capital and for there to be that development going on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kimberly. I'm going to ask Marcio now if he can tell us about his chapter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And here in the colleagues, it seems that we all started out from the same point. So trying to bring or to make a bridge in that gap between the industry and university. So what students are learning here and what the kind of skills and knowledge they are expecting to have in the marketplace. And I remember that a research that I read few years ago, about, they asked about the employers, how many of them think that students have they are being well prepared from the university. And the same question were asked for university professors. And there are very different responses here. So university think almost 70% of universities thinks that they are preparing well their students, and only 30% of employers think that students are well prepared for what they will be seeing in the marketplace. So my chapter is about having students working with real life clients. They have to develop, it's a fundamentals of marketing course, and they are doing their degree in business. And I select some small companies and startup companies that would be benefited to have a marketing plan for them because they have this need. And I bring them in the first day of class to introduce themselves, briefly introduce their marketing needs. So your students are free to make their groups and to choose one of those companies to work with. And this is the 4th year that I'm running. And I call this Connections Project just because we are trying to connect the industry or the marketplace with university, academic side, and also the students in their training, during their training at the university. So they are free to choose which kind of company they would like to work with. And they have a marketing plan to develop along the semester. And to avoid having them working just in the last 2 weeks before the final presentation, I schedule 3 or 4 partial deliveries along the semester. And they have to deliver it to me, they have to deliver it to the client as well. And both should give them feedback. So I will be giving them more feedback on the academic side, and the client should give them feedback on the business side. And then they will be having this information to build up their marketing plan at the end of semester. And they have the final presentation, the whole marketing plan, which might not be a surprise for me, neither for the client, because we have been revising their partial deliveries. And then they have this final presentation in front of the company's rep, usually the owner or someone that he or she have assigned to do this. And we give them a final feedback, having this whole piece of information ready and delivering at once. So it has been a great experience for me and for them as well. I have been in the final exam, which happens just the following week after the final presentation. I usually add some questions that are not about the content of the marketing, but the experience working with a real life client. So usually I ask them, what was the most easily concept that to apply in that kind of situation, that client, in that company? And what was the hardest concept for you to understand or to apply in that company? And some other questions about the experience itself. So this is a kind of question that is not wrong or right, but it's high valuable for me because it gives me a feedback about how their experience working with a real life client. And also for the client, it's a marketing plan almost for free. I told them it's not actually for free because you have to devote time to read and to give them feedback. And sometimes there are, as we have, as we have good students that do amazing job and some that do only a so-so job, not that amazing. We have also clients that they are so devoted to the project and giving feedback and positive feedback, specific feedback, and some that somehow, because of lack of time or lack of interest, I'm not very sure, not that helpful to students. But in general, I think it's a very good experience for them and for me as well. We have had this kind of project for 4 years now, and 41 students, because we have not that big classes, which is great in a sense. And now we have worked with 21 companies. Yeah, This is the number that we have worked with. So the chapter is about my experience and also a kind of guideline for those who want to adopt this kind of learning experience and strategy for students. And the biggest challenge, in my opinion, to adopt this kind of strategy, learning strategy, is because it's very time consuming. It's lots of work to be done previous to the semester, because I go knocking on the doors, offering the company the opportunity to take part in the project. And then I have to prepare documents. I have a kind of formal agreement between the company and the university on my person. And I also have a non-disclosure agreement signed by students, by me, and by the company's rep, because the students will need to have access to some financial data and to show some profit and sales figures. So company needs to be sure that they won't be disclosing that information with nobody, right? So we have to prepare this documentation, and then the following up, I have to be reminding companies that, oh, remember that you have your schedule, but next week they will be delivering part 3 of the marketing project. So take time to read it and another time to meet with students and blah, blah, blah. So it's time consuming. My opinion is this is the biggest challenge for implementing this kind of experience. But I think it pays off. So I'm doing this for 4 years now. And yeah, it's basically this, what is the chapter about.
Thank you so much, Marcio. That again,
my pleasure.
So much helpful insight from your experience, and the fact that there's this huge gap in perceptions between employers and higher education around how prepared graduates really are. Just, you can't think of a better justification to use real life clients in this kind of work. But as you say, it adds another dimension of complexity, so it's going to take a bit longer. But it certainly sounds like it's worth it from what you've described. Thank you very much. So we're going to go into some questions now. And I think, Stephanie, you've got one to start us off with.
Yeah, Marcio, that's really, really interesting. And I think we can't do enough of this kind of direct experiential learning at our universities. And could you maybe elaborate a little bit about the virtual aspect of it? Like, where did that come in? And do you think that this kind of project can be replicated all across different disciplines? And also, does it have to be virtual, or could it also be in a seated environment? Or, you know, how can this be replicated elsewhere?
Okay, so yeah, we started off not being virtual, because our university is a rural university, and we have lots of small communities surrounding us with good business to start off, and also Winnipeg, which is a bigger city here. But the virtual aspect of it open up lots of opportunities, and I would like, and maybe this is a kind of challenge and that I will be throwing up to you. So I would like to see these virtual teams working internationally. So we have marketing needs here as the same small companies would have in US or UK or whatever, Portugal. And we could have this partnership working between 2 or more universities to make virtual teams to address marketing needs for companies that are not in the same area. Why they need to be? They don't need to be. We have all the resources to do this from distance. And also, I'm pretty sure that this can be replicated in different fields, in different disciplines, different subjects. And I would love to see, this is my probably ultimate goal, I would love to see a bigger thing happening along few semesters. So maybe with the same company. So now this company has a marketing plan. but they need now a financial help. So why not students that are taking finance in a business degree? Why can't they do the same thing to oversee the financial aspect of the same company? So along 3 semesters or 2 years long, we could boost that company in lots of different aspects. So organizational behavior, finance and management things, so basic management, all of this could be applied if we only get some professors to work together in a more longer term plan. So it's not easy. There's lots of things to be adjusted, but I think it would be a great experience for students.
Well, that leads me actually to the next question, which is, I mean, it's fascinating, and I think a lot of people would be motivated to do this. What do you consider the biggest challenge, or what was the greatest challenge that you had to face to try to organize this kind of learning strategy?
Well, here in Canada, I found something easier to be done, because I have been doing this in Brazil, but it was easier because I let students use their own connections to find a company. And usually companies there are more close and sensitive to share information. And here I found that universities and business in general are more interconnected, which make things easier to develop a project like this. But the biggest challenge for me is what I said, you have to devote time from academic perspective and from the business side as well. And if you are not aware of this, although I make every effort to, before they sign the agreement with me, I have a meeting with them. And I have a meeting saying, so this is what we will be requiring for you. If you agree with this and that, especially the time that we need you to devote to this, you are more than welcome to sign this agreement and to take part in the project. But I know I have this feeling and I have this feedback. When I share with a colleague about this and they said, wow, this is amazing. But I see in their eyes that they won't be taking this initiative because it's too much work during my summer break. Oh, come on. I prefer to do other things than preparing for this kind of project. Yeah, it is what it is. So we can change that, but I'm still looking for other passionate about this life experience for students to join me and maybe doing a greater and a bigger project. I would love to work with you in an international project as well. Doesn't need to be marketing, could be another field.
Thank you, Marcio. And just a couple of points to pick up on there. I think it's so true. I think any faculty that does this should get extra points in terms of career progression for the level of dedication that's required. Yeah. And I think the interdisciplinary part has so much potential. In my university, we call them helicopter projects, where they sort of hover over lots of different disciplines, and then they all work on the same project. And I think that's what it's like in the real world. You know, different departments work together, and there's so much learning that can happen that way. So I'm conscious of the time. We're nearly at the end. I just want to throw the floor open to any of our other participants who are here. Just please feel free to put your hand up or unmute yourself or put a question in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Any questions about anything that you've heard today? Complete silence. So hopefully you found that interesting and useful. And Paul has popped in the comments, very interesting. Thank you, and thank you for joining. The book will give you much more detail if you want to find out more about any of the projects you've heard about. And on that note, I'm going to ask Stephanie to share a special surprise with you all.
Yeah, this is, hopefully you can see my slide. For those of us here who would be interested in acquiring the book, we have a special discount, our Nikolaus discount. If any of you are familiar with the tradition of Nikolaus in Germany, where kids put their shoes out on the evening of the 5th of December in front of the door, and the next morning they come out and there's candy and goodies and stuff stuffed into their shoes because Nikolaus has come by. So this is our Nikolaus, pre-Nikolaus present to those of you who would like to get the book. With this QR code, you can actually get a 50% discount. To those of you who've attended the webinars, and should it not work for some reason, you can also get in touch with us and we'll make sure that you do get your discount. So just wanted to point that out to you. And of course, the IGI would also like you to be aware of all the other wonderful books that they have available for if you're interested. So there's some further information about that. Finally, we were talking just now about how we would like our colleagues to get involved and more people to engage their students in virtual learning environments. And as Marcio pointed out that a lot of colleagues say, oh no, it's a lot of work and what's in it for me, and it's my summer break and so on. And if we're honest, it does require a lot of intrinsic motivation, dedication, willing to meet on a Sunday night or on a holiday. And so that kind of leads into the topic of the next webinar next week, which is virtual learning environments and faculty development. And we're going to listen to some of our colleagues from the Arizona Global Campus. And I'll also be talking about my chapter on faculty professional development, and encourage your sort of maybe your colleagues that maybe and well I could, and to attend the webinar and find out about all the positive aspects of engaging with other faculty members, the research opportunities, the opportunities for sharing methods and pedagogics. And so, it's so that kind of ends our webinar series with the intention of motivating others to do the same things that we're doing, that we're so passionate about.
And what a perfect way to end it as well. So hopefully you've got a note of that final webinar in your diaries, or any colleagues that are thinking about doing a project like this can come and find out why it's worth it, what's in it for them. So thank you all so much to our contributors today, and to all of our participants for coming along to hear about the chapters in our book and our projects. And I think that's brought us exactly to 6:30, so we will close the webinar there. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Suitable for use in your course syllabus and as an integral resource for research advancements within your department, this publication should be included within your institution's library, along with these related publications.
Offered in print, ebook, and print plus ebook, and as a part of IGI Global's ebook collection, this publication is available through IGI Global's online bookstore, as well as many other major booksellers and platforms, including EBSCOhost, Gobi, ProQuest, and Oasis. Purchase or recommend this title to your library today.